love it. We've now got an intro. We're going to keep using different ones potentially and making new ones. Si's very excited about the editing software.
I like the animals.
Sorry, say it again, Jodie.
I like the animals that popped up.
Oh yeah, that's one of our groups, or Aucademy animals, for people with low spoons but you want to interact by sharing cute things. So that intro, Si created that one, and we've got a lovely outro as well now with music sample from Paul Wadey, so that'll be lovely. Oh, and there's Kieran just shouting out Smitten. Hello lovely people. Apologies, we're slightly late. We were having real internet issues both ends. Can somebody in the comment section just let us know, are we okay? Can you hear us, and is the video okay? Because we were having some issues. So if you just let us know. The music got a little fast. Okay.
Oh.
Hello, Mel on YouTube saying they're excited that they can finally make a live. Is that because we're usually on Facebook? Because I am trying. Yeah, we now stream to multiple sources to make it easier for people. Oh, lovely, loud and clear. Okay, fantastic.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody, so much for your comments to let us know. Great. Okay, so I am Chloe, and I'm joined today by Jodie Smitten. I didn't actually check that I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Fantastic. And so today there is potential for some trigger warnings in the sense that we will be talking about young people's mental health. So obviously, please bear that in mind. But I don't think either of us plan to be giving any sort of detail that might be distressing. So today we are talking about young autistic people's mental health, burnout, and potentially some practical advice for families. I recognise, because we're going to do intro about who Jodie is, I recognise that we're talking specifically about young autistic people, but I assume that some of what we'll talk about will apply to adults as well. Is that fair?
Yeah, most definitely. I can relate to a lot of what I see in my work with children and young people, and I know that other adults that I speak, autistic adults that I speak to as well, can have exactly the same challenges.
Fantastic. Okay, not fantastic that they have the same challenges, but yes, fantastic that it might apply and be useful for adults as well as young people.
Quite often when I'm doing my talks, and particularly the one that I did recently with Tanya from Send Family Instincts about burnout, is a lot of parents came away going, oh my goodness, I think I'm in burnout. That was really relatable to me as an adult as well. So I've had parents come away, adults come away from my talks actually finding it quite insightful for themselves. So yeah.
And I think it is something that, burnout particularly really is only something you learn from the autistic community. You don't learn it. We had our first burnout paper, research paper or article last year. There's only one. And, I think the community has spoken about burnout, autistic burnout, for a very long time. So I think a lot of places are quite slow to catch up. Okay, so our very, very first basic questions before we jump into the nitty gritty then are always the same for our guest speakers. So who are you and what is or are your dedicated interests?
Okay, so I'm Jodie Smitten. I'm an autism specialist. I work with children and autistic children, neurodivergent children and their families, and ideally their schools as well, to support understanding, acceptance, and advocacy, essentially, to and that might be self-understanding and self-acceptance with the child, but also all of the adults around them as well. I'm also a parent to autistic children, and I do talks and webinars and to anybody that will listen, essentially. So autism's always been a special interest of mine before I even realised that actually a special interest was even a thing, since I was quite young, particularly as I've had my own children and had experience of particularly my daughter, autistic masking's become sort of an interest within an interest, which is how I've ended up sort of connecting with Kira and Rose. So that's where I am, and I'm sort of finding that that's made a natural journey into burnout as well. Just because most of the children that come my way have been maskers and ended up in some form of burnout.
And when did you discover yourself that you were autistic?
So relatively recently. So my daughter was identified 2 years ago, just coming up 2 years ago. And for a long time, we'd sort of known that she was autistic for a few years, but I think previous to that, it was common for us to just say, well, she does that because I do that. Oh, well, she's like that with her food because I'm like that with her food, or and so when she was then identified, I was a bit like, well, if she's autistic and for all of her life we've been saying that we're really similar and we do similar things, then I must be as well. So I sort of started this journey of sort of discovery and really just self-emerged in the autistic community online, mainly, well, all online really. And it just sort of became really obvious. And I suppose for me as well, I sort of self-identified for some time, and then decided to treat myself for my birthday to a non-clinical assessment. And it was important for me really because I felt that I needed to be confident in my identification, particularly working with children and young people. I wanted to be able to share that with them really confidently. And like the last year, or the last 2 years, like my life's just been on this epic journey. It's just been buzzing. It's had its ups and downs, but my head just doesn't stop ticking really about the journey I've been on. Has been really incredible, and I'm really thankful to all of the people that I connect with online and the autistic community as a whole. Really, it's sort of explained a lot as well. It certainly explains why I just managed to engage so well with the children that I work with. That's been the biggest thing for me.
Well, so that leads us into then and jumping into the topic. So I'm going to read my note that I kind of made to Jodie about why I'm also really interested and glad that Jodie could come and do this session. So at this point in time, I'm really interested in discussing the possible reasons why I, for instance, am seeing so many young autistic people, maybe their families as well, where the autistic young person is unable to leave their room and their devices. There's no judgment here, by the way, of using devices. It's just some of those children actually have expressed themselves that they don't want to be constantly on their device, but they feel that they'd be more distressed if they came away. So I'm finding that really interesting. So unable to leave their rooms and their devices. I've been trying to work out the pattern. Is it school trauma? Because a lot of them have had school trauma, including some of them have experienced restraint, which we don't need to go into today, but obviously it's multiple forms of trauma can be experienced in school settings. A number of them expressed in different ways, and one specifically that they feel they have no agency in their lives. So a fantastic young person that I've interacted with, 13, articulated that they don't feel they have agency, that they wouldn't have agency in their future and things like that. And that was huge for such a young person to kind of be aware of that. So is it, like I say, I'm trying to pick up on these patterns. Is it school trauma? Is it that they have no agency? Is it extreme burnout? And is it enough to just say it's burnout? You know, am I trying to look for something that's not necessarily there? It's just extreme burnout. They've had enough. And so for some of them, they're wanting to be able to do more than stay in their room. They've expressed that, and to do more than be on a device all day, but they're feeling completely unable to do so. And I found that particularly interesting as well, because I had a conversation with Sonia Bouet recently about this, about why I, in my autistic bubble, where I don't leave my house, and I've got, you know, my devices, I'm here doing work 7 days a week, my bubble, my autistic bubble, is replenishing for me and gives me meaning, because I've got reason to get up, I've got reason to come online and talk to people and things like that. But these young people's bubbles, they don't seem to be doing that for those individuals. I know there's a lot in that, what I've just said. So I'm not necessarily answering for any insight into that unless you had any, but it's kind of where I came at when I was thinking, right, we've got Jodie on.
Yeah. And I think it's, I mean, there's so much there. I need to structure it in my head, but it might just come out in one big blur. I think one of the interesting things I picked up is you were saying, is it okay just to say this is burnout? And I think that's a really valid question, because, I hear about, I get emails daily from children that sound burnt out, and I work with children that are in burnout, and actually it feels, the description matches perfectly. The prognosis is really difficult, because I can't say to a family, okay, this is going to take 7 weeks, and in this week we're going to do this, and this week we're going to do that, and actually it's really difficult, particularly, I suppose, as an autistic parent. You want a plan, you want a roadmap out of that, and it doesn't really work like that. It's okay, well, we could be here weeks, we could be here months, we could be here years, and just to say to parents, okay, this is where we are, we just need to follow the child's direction, we just need to meet the child where they're at. We have to have really low demands, we have to remove all pressure, and that child has to know that all of that pressure is removed from all adults, so that they don't feel like, oh, I'm missing out on my education. Sorry, my dog's just walked in. Lottie, she's trying to drink my tea. That's the annoying thing. So it's really hard to have that conversation with parents, because if your child is in burnout, that's a 24/7 role to care for that child and support that child in their recovery, and the impact is gigantic. But equally, like when I've worked with families who have been able to do that and remove demands, and that allow child to be able to stay at home, sometimes in their pajamas for months on end, with their devices and their comforts around them with no demands, I am starting to see progress with some of those children. I'm starting to receive messages from parents to say, we've managed this today, or she's managed this, he's managed this, and actually that's really reassuring for me, because when I've said, okay, this is the approach I feel that we should take, it's I can't give any guarantees for that child and where that's going to end up and how long that's going to take. But I'm seeing more and more that approach is proven to work. I just think it's really devastating, because it's devastating for the child who wants to be able to manage more, doesn't feel able. And I think there's so much to be said for the agency thing. And in agency, I'm just going to double check I know what you mean. In agency, you mean like autonomy and control over what's going on. And when you think about children's lives in comparison to some adults, not all autistic adults, but in comparison to some adults, children, particularly when you imagine them in school, have no agency. So they get told when they can eat, they get told when they can socialize, they get told sometimes what they can eat if they're restricted to school meals or what's been put in their lunchbox that day, even restricted as to when possibly they go to the toilet, restricted as to what activities they're doing, restricted by the environment that they're in. They don't have any control over the environment where they're in. And, you know, when we consider sensory differences and sensory overwhelm, that's like in itself, you know, just an absolute minefield. Like, you know, when you really consider being sat in a classroom, you know, there's no agency at all. And I just think there's so much in that. There's so much in that. Most of us autistic adults have worked out ways to be able to manage our work lives. Like, I don't work full time, you know, mainly because of my children. But I think even if I didn't have the children, I think I would struggle to work full time. I certainly couldn't be face to face with people full time. I certainly couldn't be sat in a classroom with 30 odd people around me full time. It would burn me out. You know, and I just think that's really heavy going, really heavy going.
And I think there's a number of things there as well. So the families that I'm thinking of is, yeah, they're young people, are no longer in school. So the families are trying everything. They're doing a really fantastic job to listen to their autistic young person. So, you know, they're either homeschooling or even just no school at this point, because their child is not in a place to learn. You know, one of these children has been in their room for 3 years, and I had to check. My idea of being literal obviously would be literally they've been in their room for 3 years, and they said yes, that's the case. But that lovely young person does have hopes. They want to do things, you know, they've got ideas about what they would like to do. So yeah, I think coming back to this, I think in a bit would be quite useful as well. Is it enough for me to just say I think it's just burnout in quotation marks? But that obviously means that there's loads of things that led up to that burnout, and now that's where they are. And I think it's quite difficult for families and young people, I guess, to be told kind of like a watch and wait. So yeah, have that low demand, that low arousal environment, really take away that demand from that young person, which we'll come back to the questions. There's a couple of parents who've asked, you know, what do you do though if you're the parent as well in that situation? That means that you're going to be burnt out. So we will come back to that. And now I've lost my train of thought. Hold on. And I know Tanya's in the comment section. I don't have attention differences. It's just like a running joke. It's a running joke now. So, you know, it's that watch and wait, you know, having to tell those families it probably is a watch and wait. But I think it is slowly, you know, trying to explain, and it is dawning on them that burnout really does mean something more than what they imagine. Because again, lovely family work really hard to have that low demand, low arousal approach for their young person. And recently their young person did actually leave the house to go to 2 family activities, and they seemed to enjoy it and they were happy to be there. And so that parent was like, oh, okay, but I imagine even though they've enjoyed it, I've learned they're going to burn out still because they still used energy. Yeah. But they were quite kind of shocked to some extent that they didn't realize that it wouldn't just be the next day that would be burnout. It might be multiple days. Yeah. You know, imagining the recovery time would be much quicker than it actually was, and things. Kind of gone off on weird tangents, but I think there are definitely some things to come back to, if that's okay.
Yeah, and I think as well, just going back to your first statement, as I think there's a lot to be said for what's happened during lockdown, because what's happened for a lot of the children, and I mean this is certainly applicable to myself, is that in lockdown we've completely unmasked. We've spent days in our PJs or our really comfy clothes. We've stayed very much in these very comfortable bubbles. We spent a lot more time, some of us, in nature. We've not had the external pressures, the social demands, the school demands, the work demands that we've had. Even I mean, I've even just found that actually, even though I absolutely love my job, just leaving the house is really exhausting for me.
Yeah.
To the point where now I have set days where I leave the house and set days where I don't. So lockdown's been a really interesting time because we have all found a way of functioning, living, existing that has felt more comfortable for many of us. A lot of the children that I support haven't really been interested in staying in touch with friends that they maybe were at school with. Maybe they've actually found a new way of learning. They've had a lot more freedom to self-direct their learn. They've had a lot more freedom to engage with people online, which is more comfortable for most of us. And so suddenly then the lockdown restrictions are lifting. Actually, for some of us, that's actually closing us in a lot more. It's the opposite. It's actually restricting us.
And that's why I say my autistic bubble, which was forced on me because of lockdown, but I embraced it very, very quickly. I leave the house once a week to go food shopping, and I don't feel depressed. I'm fine in my space that I've created for myself. And I think something you just said made me it's not a very big epiphany, but a bit of an epiphany, is okay, for some of these young people, this extreme burnout and sort of this shutdown into their own rooms and devices happened before the lockdown. But for some of them, it was potentially during the lockdown. But what you've kind of made me think about is it's only once we stop do we then actually realize that we're exhausted. And then it's really hard to start again because we're still trying to recover. So it makes me think of and obviously for anonymity, I won't go into details, but a lovely person who is always on the go. And I said, well, there's still some trauma to work through, not with me, because I don't do that kind of work. So trying to, find them somebody supportive who's autistic or at least very autistic, understanding to support them through trauma that they've experienced in their life. But I think it's like post-traumatic stress is post. The thing has to stop usually for that person to then get or experience post-traumatic stress responses. So you just made me think about that actually for many young people and adults, the lockdown has meant you've had to stop.
Yeah. And you've had the time to process it as well. Like when you think about the 6-week holidays, you spend the first, certainly in our house, you spend the first week actually adjusting to it not being term time anymore and adjusting to a new routine and what's happening throughout the summer. And then you get possibly maybe a small period of of downtime, and then you're then the following couple of weeks you're thinking about the next school year and the pressure of that. So in a 6-week period, the pressure of school is always sat there, and it's always lurking in the background. Who's my teacher going to be? Who am I going to be sat next to in class? Is the work going to be difficult? All of those things. Whereas lockdown was such an extended period of time that you were actually able to process some of that and go, I quite like this. You had the time to adjust and start to recover. And there's things that I won't ever go back to doing. There's people I won't go back to seeing. And I had so many parents contact me during lockdown saying I can't get them to leave the house, and I'm like, well, let's face it, Boris is telling everyone to stay at home. Like, it's been a really interesting time, I think, for our community. And there's something else I was going to say then that popped into my head and now I've forgotten it. Not leaving the house, being at home. I can't remember what it was now. I've lost it. That's annoying. It might come back to me at another time. But I do think that people have, young people, children included, have found another way of living that's more comfortable.
And I do wonder, I am thinking now as well, like I say, that maybe it's just more apparent now that their burnout they are really immersed in it because this is an unprecedented time in history when there was no other option as well to actually just stop.
Stop.
So I think that's something interesting. Like I say, I'm trying to build up this pattern among these lovely, lovely young people. So that's fantastic and helpful. I know, everyone say hello to Jasper. He's just waiting until the beardy human comes home. He doesn't actually care about me that much right now. He's just like, where's beardy human? Yeah, he's just like, I know the answer, live like a cat, sleeping all the time,
just modeling for us.
Yeah, he's just like, this is how you live, like a cat. So back to our actual main questions, because we literally haven't started them. So what do you do as a children's autism specialist?
What do I do? It really varies, obviously, as you can imagine, according to the family, the child, at what stage they're at in my journey. And one of the things that I said to you, the reason why I don't always refer to myself as an autism specialist. Sometimes I refer to myself as a children's wellbeing practitioner, because I get many families come to me who would never even consider that their child might be autistic. They might come to me because their child's showing signs of high anxiety, or having big meltdowns that aren't recognized as part of being autistic. And I get really, this sounds really sad, I get really excited if I help discover an identity with a family and with a young person, and to be at the very beginning of that journey with a family, and to follow that journey through from this really anxious child, where we do a bit of unpicking, we do a bit of working out, we maybe look at some assessments, we maybe have that formal identification process, and then we we go on this journey of discovery, as I call it, and that's just such a privileged position to be in, to do
and
that.
I think also a really good one for that family and those young people, because you can really steer them away from the culture of autism and let them embrace the autistic culture, and that will do wonders for their well-being to avoid that.
I mean, we'll even talk about diagnostic criteria and the boxes that need ticking, but I will always reframe that, and I will always sort of give a bit of a warning to families going through that process, to say, this is the language that's used. This isn't actually the language that applies to your child. And I think, having that positive narrative right from the beginning is really, really important. So that's part of what I do. Sometimes I might work with a family right from the beginning. Sometimes I do some one-to-one work with children. Unfortunately, my availability just doesn't allow me to work one-to-one with every child that I would like to. And some of that, again, will be around that self-understanding, that self-acceptance, that creating that positive identity around being autistic, and also doing a lot of what I call unpicking, because quite often children won't necessarily be aware of what it is that's going on for them in school that they're finding tricky. They might not be aware that nobody else finds, or not nobody else, but the non-autistic or the non-neurodivergent children in the class aren't struggling with the buzz of the whiteboard, or the sunlight coming through the skylight, or something along those lines. If that's your normal, then you don't necessarily recognise that other people aren't experiencing that as well. So we do a lot of unpicking, working out what the challenges are for that child, just through like one-to-one sessions. I've just got the best job, really. I love doing one-to-one work, because I just go along and we sit and play with fiddle toys and sometimes draw, and I'm terrible at drawing, so we always have a good laugh at that. I've actually got into trading fiddle toys with one young person, which is brilliant. Like, she brings along her swapsies and I bring along my swapsies. We just talk about ourselves, and that's really, really lovely. And there's so much about the relationship that's so important, particularly because so many of these children have had a really a not good experience with external adults, there's quite often a level of trauma there. So the relationship for me is the biggest thing, and I'll always say that to a family, is that I can't say to you that I can come in and in 6 weeks' time I can put you together a perfect plan of what I think your child needs. It could take me 6 weeks before they're able to enter the room with me, or it could be that the second they see me, that's it. We sit and we chat and we just click just like that. I don't work in any prescribed way. I don't fit into any prescribed profession. I just literally take along a bag of fiddle toys and some pens and paper and just see what happens, essentially. So we do all sorts. So that's part of my role. Sometimes I do that work with parents. In parent consultations, I do a lot of that at the moment, particularly because I've got families from all over the country contacting me, and I can't be all over the country, but they might talk through their concerns about their child, or they might talk about how their child's presenting in a particular way, and sometimes I can offer them a frame around that, or a possible understanding. I'm always very much like, okay, this is a possible take on it. You're the expert in your child. I might be wrong. And we just continue to have an open conversation. I always treat the parent as the expert, because I know that I'm the expert in my children, and I meet so many parents whose voices and concerns haven't been listened to or accepted.
And I tend to think the families that reach out to actually autistic people like ourselves, they've literally reached out to us because we're autistic, and they're hoping for that insight. And I think that they are so used to having to explain their child to neurotypical people, and it's actually quite sad. So a number of families, before I've met the young person, sometimes the young person will never meet me, and they're not in that place, because actually particularly I try to take out all the title and stuff from my name and just have Chloe, because they don't want to talk to professionals. They've had enough of talking to professionals. Yes. And I always try to explain, I'm not that kind of doctor. We will just talk about your interests. Let's talk about, I don't work, because I'm not a therapist, I don't work in that way. It's literally just, let's have a conversation. And if I can share about myself as an autistic person with them, then I will, but I let it be guided by them. But my point is that it's really interesting, because I'd been consulting with a lovely family, so parents, for a while before they'd been explaining to their young person and asking them, would you like to meet Chloe? And that went on for quite a few consultations, and they just weren't interested at that point in time. Absolutely fine. And then when I did get to meet them, the parent felt that they had to explain to me that their young person needed much more time to process what I had to say, that I would have to talk in a certain way and all this kind of thing, and really sort of almost over prepared me for this person to not be able to interact or engage with me in their way. And when I met them, they were just an autistic person. And it wasn't because because I know this family, and the way they talk about their child, they understand him and they absolutely adore him. They were just so used to having to explain him in a way that non-autistic people would understand. And I've had multiple parents do this, different age young people. One who was 20, the parent did the same thing, and they didn't need to, because when I went into the interaction, they were just an autistic person, or just an autistic person with attention differences. And I understood that I could see the cogs turning, and they were processing what I said, and I just needed to hold on. It was really sad that I could see the amount of work that those fantastic families were having to do with non-autistic people.
Yeah.
And I can imagine why they and their young people are fed up with non-autistic professionals, basically.
Yeah. And I find the same quite often in parent consultations, that parents like they feel like they have to, particularly if the child's not identified and they've had the struggle getting their child identified, they feel like they have to tell me everything about their child that like ticks those autistic boxes, and I'm just like, I believe you, it's okay.
They're always having to defend it, and that's really terrible. It's, you know, that they're having to defend that to so many people because of the lack of resources. That those schools will be pressuring that family to prove that they're this autistic stereotype that I have in my head.
Yeah, and I think as well, you know, I've got a few parents that, you know, will sometimes we might have a few emails back and forth, and I might say, okay, try XYZ, or get in contact with, usually Send Family Instincts, blah 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 blah. I'm not sure if I'm the right person to help you right now. I'm more than happy to offer you an appointment if you just want to talk things through. And some parents do just take me up on that opportunity, and they sort of say, it's just so nice to actually speak to somebody who gets it and who listens and who understands, and you know, it ends up being a really therapeutic hour or 2 hours, or and just to have that really safe space to talk about their concerns, and for all of that to be validated.
That, I think, is actually, like you say, the particular families that are going to reach out to people like us. I think some of that's what I was doing the other day with this lovely family, and I was saying, because they tell me what they do, I can see how they interact with their young person, and it's, you know, low demand, low arousal. I can see them giving that young person time to process and engage and things. And I just said, you are doing a great job. I know it doesn't feel like it because your child is still in that extreme burnout and so on, but they are doing a good job. And I guess it's because we want, all of us, whoever we are, want to see progress, whatever that, and we want it more quickly, because these are people's young people that they care about. But I guess it comes back to, sorry, go on.
Oh, no, go on. I think because as well that, you know, I'm very much the same. Like so many of my consultations end in just to reassure you what you're doing is perfect. This is exactly what your child needs right now. But that's actually quite often the opposite to what they're hearing from elsewhere. They're hearing, no, your child needs to be in school, or you know, they need CBT, or they need medication, or, you know, not saying that any of those things aren't always necessary, but I mean, particularly the your child needs to be in school thing is, there's massive pressure that sits behind that. There's massive pressure from you know, risk of fines and risks of you know, all of that parent blaming stuff. So actually to hear somebody say, no, what you're doing is perfect, you're doing a fantastic job, it's, you know, it's really reassuring. And I do have that conversation with parents quite often, and I quite often say to them, look, if you ever want to just book back in with me just for half an hour, just to review how things are going, or just to feel reassured that you're still on the right track, or, you know, just to air off at me, like that's absolutely fine as well. Because, you know, I'm a parent, and I'm fighting a battle myself with trying to get my children what they need. And I'm really fortunate that because I work in the field, I have this amazing bubble around me who I can just rant off to, or go to Tanya for advice for, or go to Kieran.
And there's a couple of things there, which is what I would recommend as well, is finding those good spaces. So if you're a non-autistic parent, finding a good group that you can just say you've had enough of professionals and so on, and just hear back, like you say as well, that no, you're doing the right thing, low arousal, no low demand, don't expect something of them when they just can't manage. So I'm just going to hide the comments because I'll get distracted.
I'm glad to get distracted by them.
and something that I'm sure multiple people have said, but I'm pretty sure I've heard it from Jodie, is it? I think I've heard it from Tanya Adkins, which is that, you know, allowing parents to also, for themselves, recognise that there are certain things that seem like you're supposed to do them, like brushing teeth and so on. And I'm pretty sure I'm quoting the right people. So both Jodie and Tanya saying, but will they die though? You know, if they don't do these things that we think they have to do, like, okay, your young person hasn't exercised for a year. Will they die though by not leaving the house and exercising? If there is concern, okay, that might be something to look into. I have not exercised well over 2 years. I am okay. I'm eating okay, and things like that. You know, I'm not going to die from not exercising. At this point in time, I have not got the energy or the ability to leave the house to do that. And that might change, and it probably does. Because I think our cycles, I was trying to explain this as well to a lovely family, that our cycles as autistic people, we have to learn what those are. And if they're very young people who are going into a burnout stage where they're not doing exercise or anything like that, it can be worrying that that's it and they're stuck that way. And my advice is always, well, if things can get worse, they can get better. And I learnt my cycle because I was that very, very tired, always sleeping teenager. I was very depressed and all those, you know, quite suicidal and things. But then I learnt my pattern, which is I can almost sort of do a bit of exercise for maybe a year. Then I have a lot of time where I don't do any exercise. Then I do exercise again. And so it's learning your pattern is probably longer. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday, actually, is that like we were talking about our own cycles and how it's coincided that we've got to this stage where we're tired, we're dizzy, we feel quite low, and you can actually see it in our doctor's records where we've gone, I think I need my blood checked, until we've got to this stage where we're like, oh no, we don't need a blood check. This is part of our cycle. We're going into this burnout cycle. We actually just need lots of self-care right now. And I think in something I say to parents quite a lot is that actually you're not making a rod for your own back by doing XYZ or saying to your child, don't worry about XYZ. Because I think that gets bandied quite a lot when you're a parent of children. Oh, you know, don't make a rod for your own back. I can't remember how many times I heard it about kids sleeping in rooms and beds and you're making a rod for your own back. And I'm like, well, no, actually, because when children can, they will, like when they feel able to. And for me, it's about meeting children where they are at that given time. And that doesn't mean that they're going to be in that place forever. It might mean that they're in that place long term, possibly. But you know,
I was quite similar as a teenager because I had, like I say, it was very difficult childhood in general, but the teenage years as well. And I just started having really bad nightmares and things. And me and my younger sister, 18 months younger than me, we were all sleeping in the living room with my granny, who's our carer. She brought us up, you know, as a teenager for a few years. I don't still do that now. You know, I grew up and I grew out of that and things like that. It was just something I needed at that point in time. I was not in a good place mentally, and I needed to know that there was that person, that adult there, kind of thing. We're still on the first question. Oh no, okay. So I guess we're kind of we're basically talking about it anyway. Sorry, but what are the challenges for the sorts of children that you work with?
I mean, school is the biggest challenge. You know, that I would like to be able to offer you something more than that, but quite frankly, that's it. The children that I see are in burnout due to school trauma, to invalidation, and I really struggle with this a lot because there's certain adjustments that can be put in place, and that, you know, in some schools are brilliant at that, some less so. But I'm finding more and more that actually these children are getting to such a level of trauma and such a level of invalidation before they're identified often as being autistic and having needing these adjustments, that it's sort of a bit too little too late. And there's certain elements of the school day that even with the best will in the world from a school. There's certain things that can't always be changed. Like, we can't half class sizes for those that find the sensory environment of 30 odd kids too much. The national curriculum still has so many boxes that need ticking, which doesn't work for our monotropic thinking and our joy of engaging in our sort of passionate interests. I should probably say, like, most of the kids I work with are in mainstream schools, so I'm talking about mainstream schools here more so than specialist. And there's so much about the education system as a institution that just doesn't work for autistic people.
If I'm honest, I don't think it works for any child. But any disabled child, of any neurology, any physical disability, are just doubly, affected.
Compounded.
I just don't think school really works for anyone. Very few people.
No, like, I completely agree. And I was having this conversation with someone just this week, and we were saying that actually the influx in mental health difficulties in children, what's that due to? I don't believe that is down to screens and technology. I do believe that's down to our education system, that, and I think any good, honest teacher would say the same, is that the pressures that they are under now to tick certain boxes, the curriculum is forever jumping. So I remember my daughter going into year 2 or maybe year 2, and the teacher was like, well, actually, they've jumped all of the maths, so we now have to teach all of the year 2s year 3 maths as well as the year 2 maths this year. And I was in a classroom recently of year 2s, and the teacher said to me, oh, I'm so sorry, we got such a lot to get through this afternoon, we're just literally jumping from one thing to the next. And it was literally like 10 minutes before all the books away, next book's out. It was exhausting just for me.
So I'm with Jodie, is it? We're doing, because I've been asked to create some spoon management sort of training, and I know we've got lots of different people doing lovely different things, but we're working with a particular small group of schools because they're not necessarily using things that are necessarily helpful. And what we were talking about is some things that exist already by non-autistic people who do autism-based work, which is not the same. I just got distracted by the comment. Oh no, hold on. So the stuff I'm not going to name any because it's not autistic, and I don't want to I don't want to do that. But basically, there's some things that go into schools. You've probably seen some of this stuff, and it just misses the nuance of what it's like to be autistic completely. It completely missed, for instance, in terms of trying to manage your energy or your spoon levels. They don't call it spoon levels. It doesn't include anything like transitions or the understanding of the issue for us when it comes to transitions. So you just telling me that they are jumping from topic to topic to topic to topic, that's awful. That's too much transition for your brain. Like you said, I think actually it'd be quite useful because you mentioned the word monotropic. So just for people who might not have heard that word before, the idea of monotropic mind is that as autistic people, we aren't able necessarily to divide our attention, that we kind of get one tunnel of attention. Do you have a better way of describing monotropic than me?
So I don't know, because I've never had this discussion with like, usually I check things with like Tanya and Kieran and other people. So, but I really like the image that you can get if you Google tendril theory, when you put that into Google, and it comes up with this little character that's got like all of these little tendrils coming out of his head. And when you're really, really focused, every single tendril is like focused on whatever it is that your brain is engaging with at that particular time. Like every single part of your brain is immersed in that. And if you are going to move from one task to another, the mental effort that it takes to pull every single tendril out of there, and actually some people would even describe it as painful to be able to I mean, it can't happen quickly without real distress and discomfort. And essentially, if you imagine, like, because I sort of always need like to have some way of structuring things in my head. Like if you imagine like all of your little hairs, like just, well, probably it wouldn't work for you, but all pointing
in one direction.
Yeah, and just and that being pulled. And I know that when I get really hyper focused on, like, I'm doing a master's at the moment, and when I get hyper focused on my uni assignments, like I have to try to avoid doing that, like when the kids are around, because if somebody wants feeding or needs something, I can feel myself like feeling slightly raging inside, because I don't actually, I'm in the moment and I want to stay in the moment, because actually for me, because of my executive functioning challenges, I have to make the most of those moments, because they don't always come along when I need them to. Yeah, I just think in a school setting where those tendrils are constantly being pulled and pushed and pulled and pushed, that's absolutely exhausting, because most of the time you're suppressing the discomfort or the rage that comes with that. And this is happening all the time. And in some ways, I think secondary school maybe it works better for some neurologies, because when you move from one subject to the other, there's an actual physical movement. You leave a classroom, you take a walk, and then you enter another classroom for different subjects. So I think that setup is possibly more helpful for some. I remember where we were going with this.
Well, I think because this person is kind of making the point for us as well, which is so this person saying, when you have teachers telling very ill and burnt out children that they get tired too, and if they have to come to school, then the children have to too, is ableist and cruel. And it is, because, like I say, as we've just described and how Jodie's just explained about all that attention, and for instance, you know, that many transitions in a day, I agree that I kind of get the point, I guess, that to some extent secondary school maybe present different challenges than sort of junior school in the UK. I can't remember what that is in the US, but younger school. But it does still mean that me personally as well, it's still that physical and cognitive coming away from something, transitioning to even just the moving to somewhere else, remembering where you've got to go. What do I need for this subject now? What do I have to pick up? What do I have to put back in my locker? You know, all of that is exhausting. And then trying to get those tendrils all to go back in, which you can't necessarily do readily on your own volition.
Not when it's a different subject as well. Like,
exactly.
I mean, I would struggle to get up and use the toilet when I'm hyper-focused, or eat.
Exactly. Yes. And I've talked about this multiple times. I will sit here and not move for 4 hours knowing I need to go to the bathroom, because it's only behind that wall. Because as soon as I do, I won't come back. I've broken away. I can't get back into it again. And I think we've also had conversations. You might do similar things because you're doing a master's, where you got so absorbed in like an essay or an assignment or something you're doing, and then you'll come back to it, say even like months later, and go, wow, I wrote that, because you got so absorbed.
I did that recently. I didn't even realize.
You can't get back into that mindset very easily.
I couldn't
to know how you did it.
I was like, I can't even read this because I don't remember writing it. I came back. I've been procrastinated massively because I'd really struggled with this particular assignment, and I came back to it going, oh, actually, I've done the bulk of it. I didn't even realize. And I'd actually started writing a piece that I'd already written, so that was great. But when I read back over it, I was like, this is pointless me reading this, because
we're expecting, I mean, we're not, but the hypothetical, we're expecting young people, young autistic people, to be able to do something we as adults can't do. And it's just unfair, and it's not possible. And I can imagine how easily that can lead to extreme burnout and mental health concerns.
And that's just one aspect of the autistic experience. That's one aspect. That's not even thinking about executive functioning differences. That's not even thinking about sensory differences, social differences, hyper empathy. Like there's so much
more. Communication as well, like not understanding necessarily what's being said, or not even in social situations, just non-autistic people really, they think they know when we say you need to be literal and concise for autistic people, but they don't know what that means. And I always do my cheesy thing of, saying, does anyone have a pen? Let me try and give you an example. And everyone tries to hand you a pen. And I'm like, why are you handing me that? Because you asked for a pen. No, I didn't. I said, does anyone have a pen? And the answer is yes or no. So that, and then they go, oh, you know, they really think that they know what it means to be a literal autistic person. And not all of us are. Some of us are, you know, can be relatively good at reading between the lines, which is exhausting in and of itself.
That's what I was going to say. Like, even if you are able to understand that somebody isn't being literal, that takes effort. It's not your first thought. It's your second thought. So there's a level of processing needed.
It's literally, because we had Rachel Cullen explaining, and her hypothesis about our pragmatic, like autistic pragmatic and functional language, how we work with it is we have our own. And it's fascinating because basically what you've just described is my brain will naturally think in my natural language, my natural autistic language, and it's trying to translate my natural autistic language into neurotypical language to be able to deliver that to a neurotypical person, and then take what they say back to me and translate it again back into autistic. That's tiring. That takes time. That's processing.
And sometimes I can't do that with certain people particularly, and then I just get stuck and just brush over what they've said in some way, or just exit the conversation. I've noticed that a lot more in myself recently. Going back to burnout, like when you actually piece together the challenges that we face in that school environment, you look at it and think, well, it's inevitable. Burnout is inevitable in that environment, without really, really good input. And like I have a real issue with full-time, like anything full-time school, but attendance policies don't actually allow for part-time schooling. Even flexi schooling is really, really hard to achieve, and I know that it is written within policies, but it's up to the school's discretion to allow it. And I think it's quite often allowed more so in primary, but secondary, it's difficult across the board, but particularly in secondary, because because we tried to do this with my daughter. It's like, okay, well, we'll drop French, geography, and DT, but then the timetabling meant that we would go pick her up. She'd come home for an hour, and then she'd need to go back for English, and that's not a break. Or they didn't really want to offer somewhere in school that was a break, and I was like, well, actually, that's not really good downtime for her anyway. She's still within the school environment, and yeah, I just have this issue because I know that full time just doesn't work. If we're doing full-time school, we don't have time to spend time with self-directed learning and special interests and alone time. Like I like
downtime.
I like that alone time. That's really important and recharging for me. I'd just like to be left alone with my head.
Yeah.
Which probably isn't a good thing sometimes. But
so what would you... Oh, sorry, go on.
No, I can't remember. I was going to go with that anyway.
Oh, I was just going to say, so what would you change then? I mean, apart from knocking it all down, starting again.
I have this conversation a lot because me and Mao and Tanya keep talking about setting up a school. It would just be. I shared a meme about this actually the other day. We would have exploration facilitators, because autistic brains are really naturally very curious, and like detail and like depth. So like if you imagine like how postgraduate study is run, where you're sort of given a broad topic and then you're left to sort of go and do your own, you teach yourself and you research, and it would sort of be like that, but a lot more practical, I think. It would basically be people that facilitate exploration that would be classed as that is learning, and that could be anything from nature to space to, I don't know, like.
And I think because we hear this all the time, particularly with within the sort of the drive for autonomy community, what would be classed as PDA in quotation marks, which is that those young people and adults will pick up all sorts of skills and knowledge in and around their dedicated interest or interests, if they've got multiple. He's Jasper. Everyone's so you know who the cat is. He just wants to steal the limelight. So you will learn. We had very, very early on in Aucademy, we had on a number of autistic people and also with attention differences. My partner was on there talking about the importance of gaming, for instance. But Molly Sherwin was explaining, school completely let her down. She left school not really being able to read and write, but she learnt those skills because of her dedicated interest in gaming and coding.
Yeah. And I think, and Dr. Luke Bearden, I steal this from quite regularly because I just think it's perfect. Like, the education system for autistic brains is the wrong way up. Like, we should be allowed to focus on our interests, and that would naturally then broaden.
Because you go, I can't go further with my particular dedicated interest unless I learn this other thing, which might be maths, or it might be whatever it might be, right?
And it can be broader than that. Like, we just like my youngest isn't in school. He's unofficially home learning, and he got quite interested in the tadpoles in our local pond. So I was like, okay, let's build a pond. So we dug out a pond, and then we got some tadpoles in it, and then we had to learn about what plants we needed to put in it in order for the tadpoles the frog spawn to develop. So we had to learn about what plants. So we went and spent 25 quid on a plant, which I was like, God, is that a sign of old age when you spend 25 quid on a plant? It's all in the name of learning. Put it in and it didn't grow, and so we went back to the shop, and the man was like, it was about the water temperature. And so then we learned about the water temperature, and it was because it was still really cold at night. And now, actually, today we've had a really exciting development, because now we've got little frogs that we can actually pick up and put in our hands. They're like tiny little frogs, and like I'm really proud because I've managed to actually not kill something, and we've gone from frog spawn to frogs. But that all stemmed from him just wanting to look at the frog spawn down the pond, and that's and I know that's a really narrow example, but we've learned so much, like even from digging the pond out and putting rocks around it and it needing shade, and it's just, he's only 5, so we don't need to be doing quantum physics at the moment, but it's just been an incredible learning experience that he's loved, and I've actually probably more excited about it all than him now. We've got frogs, but and now we're learning about different types of frog and stuff like that. And that's how learning should be. It should always be enjoyable, and it should always be engaging, and we learn better that way, don't we? Like, we learn, it sticks.
Well, like you say, I mean, some sadly, I didn't do well at school. I was, like I said, it really wasn't good for me, and I was told at 16 not to bother with further education. I say I'd quite like to take my certificate of my PhD and whack them over the head with it. But I went back in my 20s out of an interest, which was a very narrow interest. And then I did a degree that was based on that narrow interest, the psychology, and then it got narrower and narrower and narrower. And that's kind of, university, like I say, is relatively good for that. And some young people, it's kind of, I'm not saying that everyone should go to uni. That's not like doesn't have to be anyone's goal or expectation or anything like that. But what I think is quite sad is a lot of young people who maybe are interested in doing a subject or a topic of some description where they can really dedicate their interest, but they feel that they wouldn't be able to go to university because they're thinking of school. Yeah. And it's like, if you can get to an autistic friendly university, and mine is actually quite good, you will have that support potentially to be able to do your dedicated interest.
And I think that's, you know, really important, because actually so many of the kids I work with have been so traumatized from their learning experiences that the idea of university is just so triggering and so daunting. And I said this to one of my daughter's teacher once at a parents' evening. I said, I just want to get her through school without any mental health problems. And he looked at me really oddly, and I was like, that's it. I don't want her to lose her love of learning. You know, this is a child that, you know, was asking me at age 3 if it takes 2 people to make a baby, who made Adam and Eve. And you know, and she's lost some of that now, like, and I just feel really sad about that. And we're trying to recover that love and curiosity, which actually she's doing through her gaming now. But these kids aren't ever going to get the opportunity to get to that level and to focus, you know, have that enjoyment of that hyper focus, because their learning experiences and their experiences of education at a young age are so damaging. And I just feel really sad about the amazing things that they could have done, you know, for their own enjoyment, and also the contribution that they would make to whatever field it is that they're interested in. And
we can be very good natural researchers. So it's not even necessarily, again, that you have to go into an education establishment to be able to do that. Brooke's saying, using scholarships to afford university. Is this America as well? You might want to just clarify, forces you to go full time.
Yeah, semester sounds American. Community college.
Yeah, that's frustrating, because in the UK you can get supported to go part-time to university, so that must be an American system.
But like you said, and I think, you know, we don't necessarily need that formal establishment. There's more and more companies now that are much more interested in people than pieces of paper. The company that my husband works for, you know, they are a people company, and they want to invest in people. They want to support people to develop in their areas of interest. And you know, it's not all about the formal pieces of paper and qualifications to work there. And I just think that's happening more and more.
I mean, we're not a university yet, or an Aucademy. In my dreams and my plans, we would eventually become an actual Aucademy. But, you know, so I've got some fantastic modmins, you know, doing voluntary work with me behind the scenes. And a number of them they've been so let down by schools and the employment, you know, sector, that they don't think that they could bring anything, even to doing social media platform stuff like I'm doing with Aucademy. And I don't need to know anything about them. I don't need to know their educational background. All I need to know is, do you want to help? And if you don't feel you've got the necessary understanding about, you know, I don't know, editing videos, I will happily sit with you and show you. You know, it's more are you willing? Okay, let's give it a go and see what you are interested in, what you're capable of, and things like that. So going with the whole somebody's willing to help is enough for me. And I think, given that there's a whole field, not a field necessarily, but there's a whole area of interest in psychology, which doesn't really interest me personally, which is dedicated to, you know, sort of how do people make decisions in interview processes and things like that? And why do we not all, in those business settings and so on, why do we not always pick the right candidate and things like that? And it's because noisy humans get in the way. You need to just be looking at, does this person think they can do the job? And do they feel that they've got the skills, or can you teach them the skills? That's really all you need to know. Like, all the other waffle and noise that goes with it is why people end up in the wrong job, or they end up with the wrong person in the wrong position, because they don't do what we would do, which is, can you do it? If not, I'll teach you how to do it. Kind of thing. Okay, because I've noticed the time, and that was literally 3 questions. So we really aren't going to get through everything. So it might be that we have to have Jodie on again, which would be lovely. So I guess there's a few bits here on what does burnout feel like and look like for our young people. I guess we kind of mentioned that to some extent. But if you've got something you can contribute as an answer.
I suppose if anyone wants to hear a more in-depth answer, me and Tanya did do a webinar which is available on demand about burnout called Burnout First Aid. But it does vary obviously it varies for everybody. The children that I have experience with for burnout, it looks like unable to attend school. Certainly not able to attend school every day. It looks like often it impacts appetite in the, your sensory sensitivities will be really, really heightened. So food can become more difficult. Which and equally with the sensory sensitivities that what's the matter? My dog's crying at something and I don't know what. So yeah, food, clothing can become more difficult. So I meet lots of young people who don't feel able to get dressed. Self-care can really take a tumble. So, executive functioning challenges. So, that can also be associated with getting dressed, but showering, washing, brushing teeth, hair, all of those sorts of things. Low energy. Someone's commented more extreme meltdowns, more frequent meltdowns, longer lasting meltdowns. It can look an awful like depression, I think, in some young people and adults. Just really. We sort of call them slug days in my house, where everything feels like massive effort, really, really slow. And I suppose it's probably important to point out that actually some people continue to function at some level in burnout, it might not be recognised, or certainly when they're leading up to burnout. So they might still be managing certain aspects of life, and I suppose, they might still be managing certain aspects of life, but there's this sort of slower decline, zombie days. Someone's put, we call them slug days, where everything just feels too much. I think I talk a lot about, me and Tanya talked about this actually, where we sort of use this like idea of hitting a brick wall in that, and this is what I see happen to kids, where day in, day out, they keep going, or they feel that they have to be in school. There's pressure that they have to be in school, and they keep going, and all of a sudden the crash is gigantic, and it's like they've hit a brick wall, and they could have been managing school one day, and then the next day it's not happening, and then it doesn't happen for months, and it can be so sudden, and it can come as such a shock to school and to parents sometimes. And what's actually been happening is, that whole sort of iceberg analogy is there's been so much going on internally for that child. The struggle's been so massive, and they've been masking and they've been internalizing, that nobody has actually realized the extent of what's been going on.
And that can go on for years, because it went on for years for me. And then it culminated in, I didn't want to live anymore, kind of thing, and that, there was elements of depression there as well. So it's quite important, like you said, and what Samara's saying here is that it can be possible to pick apart, is it depression or is it burnout? But they do look incredibly similar. And that is one thing that I talk about in like wellbeing training for like therapists and so on, which is you need to pick apart, is it burnout or is it depression? Because obviously one's a psychological mechanism and one is a cognitive and physical, I can't do anymore kind of mechanism, and that means they have different support needs to some extent.
Yeah. And you know, I'm not a medical clinician, but you know, I would assume that they can co-occur.
Yes, that's true.
So then it's, you know, how do we make sure that we're meeting both challenges and both sets of needs? And I think that's interesting that actually somebody's put that comment, because about the misdiagnosis, it's not always then, you know, bearing in mind some of these children that hit these brick walls haven't ever been recognised as being autistic. So they hit these brick walls and then they end up in mental health services, and sometimes they are recognised within mental health services and sometimes they're not. When these families come to me at this point, I would usually screen for autism as just standard. And the difficult aspect that I find then is that if we discover that child is possibly autistic, is that identity comes at a time where they're rock bottom. And it's not always the best time for a child to be made aware that they're autistic, or certainly not the best time for them to find out that they're autistic, because then they associate autistic with being in that really difficult state of mental distress.
Yeah.
And they just think that that's it. Well, being autistic means being on the floor with anxiety and you know, feeling really, really low and really agitated and really awful. And when that discovery comes at that time, that's a really difficult journey then to go on, much more so than finding out that you're autistic when, you know, you're feeling okay. And this is one of the things that we had with my daughter, is that when we got on the NHS pathway, things were taking so long. And actually, after her ADOS assessment, they said to me, we might, you know, she's not ticking enough boxes. We might have to wait until the cracks really start to appear. And I said, absolutely no way. I will not wait for my child to be on the floor before she is given her identity. And you know, we took out a loan and went private, because I was not willing for her diagnosis to come at a time when, you know, because she didn't tick enough boxes, because essentially the DSM criteria is an autistic person in crisis in many ways, and she wasn't distressed enough to tick those boxes in that environment.
That's where I keep trying to do bite-sized ones on the difference between like autism and autistic experience, because they're very different things. Autism is a non-autistic derived checklist about an autistic person in distress. And yes, it's very problematic. I think I mean, like I say, burnout can look like so many different things for different people. So it's kind of recognizing the patterns. And like I say, there's a number of people as well saying, you know, we need to be careful in case it is depression or it's depression and burnout. Absolutely. And sometimes it is about looking at that pattern, because I've talked about before how I look back over my life and I can tell the periods where I knew I was depressed. There were psychological issues, like it was a psychological response to traumas or things in my environment that were like making me depressed. And then there would be periods where I would describe myself as an optimistic, depressed person, and they were my periods of burnout, because that's for me personally how I pick apart, am I depressed or am I in burnout? And that is about learning your own patterns. For me, burnout can also include loss or reduced ability to use like mouth words and things like that. So you might have young people that are usually quite talkative, maybe in some capacity, whether that's using mouth words, signing, verbalizing via devices, and then they really reduce that or stop that when they're in burnout and things. Burnout without depression improves when demands to mask are removed. I'm guessing depression wouldn't. This is what we noticed, a huge dip or crisis and the gradual rebuild as she was allowed to live authentically. Thank you. That's actually quite useful as well. Yeah, and then Amy's talking about things that I always try and struggle to, well, not struggle, but try to beat over the heads of non-autistic professionals, which is so they were told that their son's self-harm, etc., was just an autistic behaviour rather than mental health, as if autistic people can have more poor mental health and misery is just part of being autistic, and it's not. Yeah.
And I think sometimes there's an element, you know, and I hear this quite a lot where people have approached CAMS and they've just been told that, oh, that's just part of them being autistic. And I can't help but wonder whether this is just because there aren't actually the resources or tools or research or really good practice that actually supports these young people within, you know, there's not enough. There's barely any research on burnout in autistic in adults, let alone children.
Well, like I say, there's one paper last year. We might get another one this year.
There's just that. I think sometimes it's almost, and I've actually been sat in a meeting with a CAMS registrar and a CAMS clinician, clinical psychologist or something, and we've been talking about a young person, and everyone's coming to me, and I'm like, there's a CAMS registrar here, like.
But they don't, like you say, they don't know. And I sit on a local board and a national board about trying to improve the services, because it's not even about improving services. They don't exist for mental health of autistic people.
No.
And like I say, that the frustration I have is that a lot of those so-called professionals that I might meet, and some of them are really lovely people. It's not that they're, you know, bad people, but they just don't have what I class as basic knowledge. Does that young person or adult think in pictures or not? Okay, they don't think in pictures. Okay, your imagination techniques, which are the majority of your therapy, will not work. You know, is it depression or burnout? Is it OCD or the very safe, healthy, repetitive pattern of behaviour of an autistic person?
Yeah.
You know, these are what I class as basic knowledge that they have no clue of. You know, alexithymia, and
there's not any there's not any nationally you know, there's no statutory training, is there, for mental health specialists in autism? But what confuses me is to become a clinician that can diagnose, you have to have a mental health qualification. But why is it you don't have to have an autism qualification to work in mental health services? And like, it just doesn't all add up, because there's so much being.
But then the problem you would have is that, is it an autism or autistic qualification? And where is it coming from? And then I just think, is it just going to cause more harm than good? Is it actually better if they have no stereotyped knowledge of autism whatsoever? So that's such a difficult one.
Yeah, it is, because there's not, you know, the knowledge that they have got isn't brilliant, but the knowledge that they could have access to would be harmful.
It could be, yes.
One of those, you know, one's government-funded autism courses that she's been sending me screenshots of, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like some of the things talking about restricting. What do you call them? Dedicated interest, passionate interest. Talking about restricting interests and all of this sorts of crap.
And why would you do that? That's going to help that young person or adult replenish their spoons. I don't understand why you would.
This is a level 2 certificate or qualification in autism. So this is this is free. That's funded by the government. So this is the one that TAs are accessing, and anybody that, you know, anybody can just jump on it and do it. And there's workbooks in I don't know, it's like a 6-week course or something. And this is what's being accessed. This is widespread. This is out in the mainstream of prevalence.
And this is the problem as well, that this idea of accreditation, for instance, so I looked into that early on to get some of my training accredited. It's actually quite expensive, and I don't have any money right now, really. But so I'll look into that when I'm, you know, if and when I make any livable wage. But when I looked into it, it's not that they don't look at the content. They don't check the content. No. The accreditation is based on very basic steps. Do you have an intro? Do you have a summary at the end? Does it do this, that, and the other? Do you hit all your goals for this, whatever it might, your aims for that course or the session, and it's kind of like, well, who's checking the content? You could meet all of that, be accredited, and the content is absolute woo.
Yeah. But then you can walk into a school or anywhere else with that qualification under your belt, and it's looked highly upon. I did the same. I looked at trying to, even to get something CPD, the CPD mark is like thousands of pounds. But it didn't seem to be that this seemed to be, anyone can go to that organisation and get their stuff CPD stamped.
Yeah.
But to get it to get something that is a recognised qualification is, like you said, really, really, thousands of pounds. And none of us are in a position to be able to, because this is what me and Tanya discussed, is we want something that can be accessed by school staff and TAs, which is a really thorough, a really thorough, good autistic led training in the autistic experience that then is recognised, that they have this piece of paper to say, look, I've done this course, but it's not viable. So there's just all this other crap out there from these big companies that have got the financial backing to be able to just put it out there.
That's a whole other talk in and of itself.
Yeah, it is.
We probably should try and wrap up soon.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if there's any of our key questions that we have that we could get to. So tell us leaders, how can we make the professionals listen to you as carers or parents?
I get asked this question all the time. I've had parents say to me, "Oh, I've sent your blog in an email." I've even had one person that decided to send a load of stuff to her child's previous school just anonymously. She's like, "I've just sent it all. I've just sent it all. Hopefully, it might help another child." There's loads of stuff, isn't there? Both on our websites and platforms, and Kieran's and all of the other amazing advocates out there that can just be sent across in an email to schools. It's really difficult because there's nothing, I've even gone to meetings with parents and sat with a head teacher, and after 2 meetings, and I said to the parent, "I'm really sorry, I think you're gonna have to move school. I can't get him to listen. I can't get through." And actually all the time that we're trying to get through and all the time that we're trying to wait for meetings is more time that your child's in that really awful environment, and we can't do enough to change that for him quick enough. So your options are to get him out and find someone that does understand and is going to listen. I had one family pull their child out of a school because the school wouldn't work with me, and before they even looked at another school, they said to the head teacher, "We're working with Jodie, will you let her in?" And they were like, "Yeah, of course." And actually they've been a fantastic school to work with, probably one of the best schools that I work with. I think most of us are more than happy to have our stuff shared with schools and for schools to be invited.
I think that's what's frustrating is we aren't, even our training that we all deliver, you deliver, Kieran might deliver, we really are not expensive.
No.
And we also have absolutely loads of free resources as well, because none of us are doing this because this is an easy job to do. We're not doing it because we think we can make loads of money, because that's actually not that easy to do either. We are doing this because, well, all of us, I imagine, have different reasons for doing things. I'm doing this because I want to scoop as many autistic people as possible so that they don't they're not isolated and alone. I think that's one of my biggest things, is they're not isolated and alone physically or psychologically from themselves as autistic people or other autistic people. It sounds like yourself, but obviously you're welcome to correct me. You want young people not to suffer.
But probably my focus is, you know, God, from the age of dot, I've always wanted to work with children, and my past just led me to where I am now. But yeah, my passion is about the kids that, you know, and I, you know, I say this quite often at the end of my webinars and things, is like the kids that I work with are incredible. Like my own autistic, well, you know, all my kids are incredible. They're brave, they're resilient, they just have the most wondrous brains, and they're kind, deeply kind and creative, and they're just incredible. And when you see and you're on that journey with a family of this most incredible child that's just has no faith in themselves and has lost all ability, and lost so much ability because that's, you know, they're just so burnt out. Like, it's just heartbreaking. It's shitty. There's no other way for it. Like, it's killing so many kids, the system, and I get really upset and cross and burnt out by that myself. I just want to scoop them all up and let's go and hang out in the forest and just, like, actually let them learn to love themselves again, and without any shitty pressures of crap that's ruining them, to be quite frank.
And I think that's important as well, is that I won't meet anywhere near as many young people as you do, but I'm yet to meet a young autistic person that I don't like, that I've not found something amazing about their brain or their mode of communication. And certainly I needed to work on actually going and getting some counselling skills and training and what have you, to not get too emotionally attached, because then I'm like, but I don't want this person to suffer. And you know, I can be good in the moment to be problem solving, and I have an autistic counsellor friend who's always trying to help me keep also emotionally detached, because it's too much to for them to be suffering.
And I, you know, the whole hyper empathy thing kicks in as well for us, doesn't it? So it's exhausting. Shall we answer that question that's come up?
If you could.
That came up earlier, didn't it? How do parents care for their own burnout due to caring full time for children who are at home? I wish I had a magic wand answer for that, but I am that parent a lot of the time as well. So this is probably coming from me as a parent, also than a professional, is that I try to just have time where I'm just one-on-one with my child, and where we're just doing something led by them, whether it just be sat playing with some Lego or sat watching Roblox videos, or video edits that they've done, or just something. I try to just immerse myself in that, because then you remember how incredible they are and wondrous they are, and how much they're actually achieving in their own way, in their own stuff. That's really helpful for me. Just always having that backup from other people within the community, when we have a lot of pressures on us from outside sources that are telling us that we should be doing this and that we should be doing that, and even myself, I feel that, even though I'm relatively confident in parenting my autistic children, I still occasionally get that pressure where I'm like, oh god, shit, am I doing the right thing? Like, am I making things worse? And I have the people that I can check in with and say, who put me back in my place and remind me that actually, no, this is the right approach, this is the right thing. I think that's really, really important. And interestingly, I did so I put together like this little spoons theory thing, with the kids I work with, it's a mobile phone analogy, and it's basically spoons. It's an adaptation of spoon theory. There's some stuff about it on my website. No, I haven't put it on my website yet. It's somewhere. I'll try and find a link for it and put it on my page. And it's looking at a mobile phone as an energy accounting analogy. And so many parents came away and was like, I'm actually going to use this for myself as well. And I was like, yeah, do, because it's easy to apply. We all use smartphones, and it's essentially based on a smartphone. And you know, I'm really guilty of this. I'm not very good at practicing what I preach. Like, my downtime is actually my work time, which I'm not sure is very healthy. But just finding your tribe, like I talk about kids needing to find their tribe all of the time, but it applies to parents as well. Like, particularly if, you know, you're an autistic parent, you know, just find your tribe. And for most of us, that's online. That's not actually in person. You know, my socializing is done via a screen. All of my socializing, I'm trying to think of, maybe that's not the case, but literally all my socializing is done via a screen. Particularly since lockdown, I realized I don't actually have to socialize in person anymore. So yeah, just finding your tribe, you know, checking in with people that get it. Like, we started saying this to someone the other day, when people ask, oh, how's so and so, or how are you, and you just go, yeah, I'm fine. And I'm like, but what else are you going to say? Like, you're not going to suddenly reel off that, yeah, you know, the EHCP deadline is up, and the local authority still haven't provided an ed psych, and so and so had a meltdown, and you had to sit with them till midnight last night to help them settle, or you know, or that you had a really lovely time sat for an hour talking about Googleplexes in the car. Like, no, nobody gets that. Like, nobody that asks you in the street, oh, how are you, how are the kids, actually wants to hear any of that shit. They just want you to go, it's fine. So actually immerse yourself in the communities that are interested in that. Right? And actually, when they ask how are things, they actually want to know. Find those people, because, you know, and there are some incredible online groups where you can just sometimes share those. We've had this amazing day today because we did XYZ, whereas somebody else that might, or, you know, or somebody in the street, or somebody on the school run, or a parent at school might not get that. But for somebody else who does get it, they're like, oh wow, that's incredible.
I think Sai's gonna post links to your website for training, my website for training, and also we've got an autistic carers group as well. So if you're autistic yourself and you don't already have a space to connect with other autistic carers, then we've got that space as well to connect people. There's definitely so many questions I didn't get to ask, and I kind of feel sad, because for the people that actually put some questions to me to ask you, so we can have a chat about if you've got any other time, and we could cover it again.
Yeah.
Might have to do it as an extra session as well, because I think doing it soon after this one would be nice. If you're available, we can talk about that. Yeah. But for now, I've just got two final questions then. So I think, because it's been a little bit, this topic's always quite difficult. We always have a number of topics that are going to be quite difficult to, you know, hear about and so on. So is there hope that we can offer families and their young people?
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, definitely. Oh God, I wish I could like share some stories without giving too much detail. But yes, there is hope. Like, you know, I've worked with a few families long term whose children have been in burnout, and actually just today I got an incredible message to say that this family have managed a trip to the cinema, which, you know, is just incredible. Like, this is all child led, by the way. This isn't like parents saying, come on, we're going to the cinema. I had another family whose little ones been out and managed a bike ride with Dad. And this has all been done by, given that really low demand, low pressure environment. There's definitely hope. And actually, I think it's really nice when you do see on the support pages, every now and again, a parent will share a little bit about the journey, and sometimes it's been quite a long journey, and they just say, look, I just want to give hope to other parents. My child didn't leave their room for two years, 3 years, 4 years, and today they've just completed a course, or they've just managed something really, really big and incredible and impressive. And I do think there is hope. Well, we have to, don't we? We have to have hope, and we have to keep shouting, and we have to keep building our tribe, because what other option have we got? Particularly if we're parents of autistic children, we're never ever going to stop fighting for them, and we're never ever going to stop nurturing them, and we're never ever going to stop bigging them up.
I think what's quite nice and quite important, actually, from what you just said, is that maybe families, and I don't mean this in a negative way to the families, but maybe families expect too much, that the burnout, once it's passed, or the signs that the burnout is passing, would mean that they can go back to the way they were before, for instance.
Yeah, and I
think what you just described is lovely. Because you said it might just be, I say just, but it might be that they were happy to go to the cinema.
And there has to, it's never going to go back to how it was before, because how it was before wasn't working, because that's why somebody's ended up in burnout.
Yeah.
You don't want to go back to that way of life, because that wasn't sustainable, and actually what was going on under the surface for your child wasn't good. So the recovery, the burnout recovery, is actually about how does life need to look now for you? How does that need to pan out? How are we going to do your energy accounting? What does that need to look like? And I will say to families, it's obviously needs to always all be child led, but if the child does feel that they want to take a trip out, or manage, or try and manage something, okay, what does that need to look like for that child? Does that need to be a walk? Does that need to be in a car? Does that need to involve, for me, it's always about food, where's the nearest, I don't know, one person I work with, we talk about Krispy Kreme donuts quite a lot. Okay, where's the closest Krispy Kreme donut that we can get to that doesn't involve too many people? What does that need to look like? What does education going forward need to look like? Because it certainly needs to look very different to how it looked before. Very, very different quite often. Some of these kids don't ever step back in the schools that put them in this position in the first place, and I would never recommend that they should. So it's a massive shift. It's not about recovery and then going back to how things were at all. Quite the opposite, really.
I think that's a really important message, and I think that for some families that might be scary, because they kind of we knew how to do before, but like I say, it didn't really work for anybody. I also think the hope is there as well. Like you mentioned that, you'll get messages and things from young people or the families who've been indoors or in their room for 3 or so years. And I think that's really important as well, because I know a number of lovely families where their young people are in that position, and it's kind of like there's still hope that just because that's been quite a long period of time.
I think so. And I think it is, as a parent, that I'd find that terrifying. And I suppose it is always important for me to point out, like I said, I'm not a mental health clinician, and I think the difficulty for me is, I'll quite often say to the parents, I'm not a mental health clinician. We might need some, if we're at that level, we might need some mental health assessments. But then equally, I know that sometimes those mental health assessments aren't fit for purpose for an autistic child, so you end up in this catch-22 situation. But yeah, I haven't necessarily worked with a child that's been in their room 3 or 4 years, but I read a lot of stories and I hear from a lot of parents, and yeah, I think there's definitely hope. And I think, I quite often talk about finding your own normal. Like, find your own normal. For some families, normal isn't, well, certainly not for my family, is going on a Sunday bike ride and stopping at the village pub. That's not normal for us. Or movie nights. We don't do movie nights. Or even board games. Like, that occasionally we might do that, but not generally. Normal, that's not normal for us. Normal for us is play fighting at 10 o'clock at night because we need some proprioception input, or children sleeping on our bedroom floor, or holidays look very different. Traveling looks very different for us.
People were like, I can't think who it was that were joking about it recently, which was, I think it might have been in my autistic social group that I run with Annette for our university. And I was explaining, I think it was there, about how a couple of years ago, or might be 3 years ago now, Louis and we went on a bookshop holiday. So it was like 5 days in this tiny little village in Scotland it's like the smallest village with the most bookshops, right? And the holiday was you rent the apartment above the bookshop, and then you run the bookshop on your own.
Gosh.
Completely on your own. Like they turn up on the day to let you in and tell you how to run it. It's really quite straightforward and basic because it's like a charity bookshop, and they don't make the money from the books. They make it from renting it out as a bookshop holiday. And my basically about halfway through the holiday, I was getting frustrated that there was no system to the books, and I made an Excel spreadsheet, and I made a document for the next holidayers to say, can you please carry on with the Excel spreadsheet, because I was basically listing the books so that we actually knew what was in the shop. And I was getting Louis to like rearrange the books into like alphabetical order and genre. That was great. I loved that.
My God,
and everyone's like,
my husband could offer you a computer system that would do that, you see. We need to know where this place is. I think I need to go there.
It's Wigan, I think it was, in Scotland, but they were booked up. They're always booked up way in advance because it's just this amazingly weird, like, holiday. Cool. So Louis booked it when we first started dating, and then we didn't get to go on that holiday for like 2 years because it was so booked up. But it was fantastic. That's my idea of a holiday. The idea of sandy beaches is evil. It's too hot and the sand gets everywhere, and it's very uncomfortable, and I'm never comfortable on a sandy beach. I just don't enjoy it.
I love a beach, but I do like a pebble beach.
Yeah, pebbles.
I don't go in the sea. I just sit and look at it.
No, not in the sea. No, seaweed in there.
Yeah, and you never know what else.
Yes. You don't know what's going to get your foot, right? It's horrible. I think that's because we're used to the UK. So people who are used to lovely sea, clear blue waters. Yeah, you don't get that in the UK.
Fish that look like Finding Nemo, that would be okay, but not our waters.
No, far too worrying. Wigtown, thank you. Yes, it's Wigtown, and it was lovely little holiday. Okay, right. Our very, very final question for all our guests is always, what is your favourite Stim?
Oh God, I read this on the list, and I was like, I don't know. I don't know how to narrow this down. So, okay, so I've always been a really bad nail biter, which as I've got older, I realise is a Stim, and a real picker of toes and like some minging habits. But so now I always have. So I've always got these during my talks, and I actually keep them in the drawer in the office, and they're like two little stretchy lizards.
They look lovely.
But I stick them together and squish them together quite hard, and then when I peel them, they just quite satisfyingly unpeel. So I do this a lot, but they've been a bit abused because one's got a foot missing, and well, two have got a foot missing, and one of them's tail's come off a little bit. Because I know its tail's close to coming off, like I can't help just keep pulling at it, waiting for the tail to come off, even though I don't want the tail to come off. Like, what's that all about? That's weird. But this is my new favourite. So my girls made some sensory boxes over lockdown and sold them. We had a bit of a business going. That was home learning. And oh, you can't see it, can you? Like this, it's like one of those little mini snakes. But I like to bend it around and line it all up. Like
it's very neon looking as well on the camera.
It's not too neon. It's just normal orange.
It just looks it from here. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a light. So yeah, really. And when I've brushed my hair, I like it feels smooth. I like smooth things. So I like my dog's like a little bit there, just above his nose, really smooth, and his paws, his hair paws.
Oh, I love a cat paw. Louis thinks I'm really. Louis doesn't have. So Louis's sensory differences are quite different to mine. So he's like tactile sense seeking. I'm tactile averse, and I really love the smell of the cat. And he doesn't get it. I'm like, you need to smell the cat. And he's like, that's your thing. And I'm like, you need to smell him. He smells great. He just doesn't get it.
Dr. Luke Bearden talks about how he loves the smell of his dog all the time. It's one of the first things he said in our lectures, actually. It's like, oh, I'm Luke. I love the smell of my dog. Really funny story. My youngest got really good sense of smell. And the dog came in from her walk the other day. And he was like, Mum, Lottie smells really funny. And I was like, well, yeah, that's just like dog smell. And he's like, really? Is that actually dog smell? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, she's not had a shower or anything recently. So it's not like she smells particularly fresh. And he was like, no, smell her. I don't think it's dog smell. And I sniffed her. And I was like, oh, yeah, she does smell a bit different. And he went, she smells like Captain. And Captain's like somebody that we know that lives down the road. And he wears quite strong aftershave. And I was like, yeah, you're right. The dog smells like Captain. It turns out that on the walk, the dog had seen Captain and he'd stroked her. And now the dog
smells of aftershave.
And I don't know whether anyone else would have smelled that or whether that was just because we got quite good sense of smell. But I was like, oh, the dog smells all wrong now. So I'm trying to get the smell off.
This is what I said, like Louis stopped smoking again a while back, which I'm glad. But when he was smoking, I would get annoyed with him for stroking Jasper because Jasper would not smell cat. And he would smell of cigarettes and it was horrible. And I'm like, no, you've ruined it now.
That's taken away the cat smell.
And Tigger, so our Tigger Pritchard on Aucademy, he's all about dog paws. And Leslie's saying cat tummies, and people are saying puppy breath, puppy toe beans, and just puppies in general.
Toe beans.
I know, I love toe beans. Toe beans are great. I mean, something very, very lovely the other day, very, very briefly while we're wrapping up, one of my autistic students, we were talking about the issue that a lot of us can't do mindfulness, for instance. It doesn't really work for us because we can't get our minds to do what mindfulness is expecting you to do and so on. And she was talking about how her cat is very mindful, and it's because she will pay attention to like all the strands of hair, like the fur and things like that. Because I was saying, I actually find my cat really, it's not my cat, it's actually Annette's cat, but I find Jasper really mindful and makes me really happy because I get to smell him and sit and stroke. But she was literally talking about paying attention to the individual strands of fur and things. And I thought, yeah, that's lovely. That's a very lovely autistic, mindful thing to do.
Just that focus.
Yeah.
I'd be tempted to start counting them.
Yeah, potentially. Thank you so much. That was great. We're definitely going to have you back on for the other questions that I knew we wouldn't get to them. There was too many questions and there was no chance I was going to be able to get through them. So we'll have a chat about that. If you want to stay on, I'll do the outro bit and then if you're right, just for a couple of minutes. But to let everybody else know, so next week we have on Sarah McCulloch. She's an autistic occupational therapist. So she's going to be talking about navigating the mental health system as an autistic person. So potentially that's more autistic adults. So yeah, we're trying to have a nice mix of different types of talks and speakers. So thank you everyone so much for being here. Just double checking there's nothing I've missed in the comment section that we can't answer later. So yes, lovely everyone. Thank you so much. And we will hopefully see you next Saturday.